Bonjour, bienvenue. Je m'appelle Dave Douglas. C'est le podcast des Greenleaf Music qui s'appelle A Noise from the Deep. Thanks for being here. That's the music of Rory Stuart, guitarist, composer. He's the author of a new book called The Rhythm Book. It's a very well laid out, well thought out method for learning rhythm and understanding rhythm, both in improvisation and just in purely the rhythmic sense. There will be 6 volumes. We talk about it in the interview, as well as talking about his music and a lot of his students. He's been at the New School for many years, and the students that have studied with Rory Stuart reads like a who's who of the contemporary jazz and new music scene. So I want to welcome you to the show and to this music that a lot of you probably haven't heard. Rory is a wonderful person and a great educator and a musician in his own right. Before we go to the interview, I just want to encourage you to subscribe over at Greenleaf Music. It is a revenue sharing model that benefits all the artists at the label, and it's kind of a new plan for how I think documenting creative music and distributing it is going to be working in the future. I'm super excited about it, and I record a special set of exclusive subscriber tracks every year. This year you've probably heard about this piece called Uplift that I recorded with Joe Lovano and Bill Laswell, Ian Chang, Mary Halverson, Julian Lage, and it's been released 1 track a month so far for 2018. And each piece is dedicated to an issue that I think is really important to be active on in a positive way during this time of change. So I want to thank you again for being here, and here it is, the Greenleaf Podcast with Rory Stuart. Thank you. Rory Stuart, welcome to the show. Thanks for making time.
Thank you, Dave.
It's been great to hear your music, different recordings. So in this show, we're focusing on 2 recording sessions. One that we were just hearing, this tune Push Pull from 1986, and then the other one that we're going to hear a little bit later from 2004. It's kind of made me want to ask you, I mean, you have so many topics that we could talk about. And obviously, this rhythm book that you've written is an important one, but it made me think about you moving to New York, being a guitar player. In what year?
In 1981, although I was here for a few months in 1979. In 79, I came here with another friend from Colorado, and it was relentlessly difficult for me. It was super hard to find an affordable apartment. This was before there were university programs like the one I teach at now, so there wasn't a ready-made way to, know other musicians right away, and people were not always so hospitable to having you sit in on their gigs, and so it was pretty challenging just earning a living, and I felt, whoa, this is not leading the way I expected to, and after a few months I went back to Colorado.
Wow.
And then it was kind of interesting because in Colorado I was back to being the big fish in the little pond, getting loads of work, everything's going great, and then one of the people I had called when I was in New York for that few months, Brother Jack McDuff, who didn't sound like he had any interest in me, somehow found out my Colorado number, called me out of the blue, and hired me to go on the road with him.
Great.
And
wow, I didn't know that.
And that was in 79.
Is that what brought you back to New York ultimately?
I did that. I did some more stuff in Colorado for a stretch, and then I really started feeling about the big fish, little pond thing. I had these aspirations for musical things that I wanted to do, and I just knew I needed to be in New York to do them. So I came back in 1981.
81.
And this time, things went better. I had gotten to a higher level musically. I knew some more people, and I had more of a vision of what I wanted to do. And part of that was quite early on. I started leading my own groups, but along the way, I ended up playing with all these legendary, people as a sideman.
Right. We were listening to this tune "Push Pull" from your record Hurricane, and so it's 1986. It's within 5 years of you moving to New York. You're making a record with Keith Copeland.
And actually, there's
Anthony Cox and Armand Danielian.
And there was an earlier record I made with that same group, except with Calvin Hill on bass, that's only on LP. And I knew you had more than you'd have a chance to play, so I didn't give you any tracks from that. But that's
LPs don't work on a podcast anyway.
Right,
no,
exactly. And that was from 1982. I'm pretty sure. So
pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But also, had you already written the bulk of these tunes when you moved to New York, or did you write them when you got here?
The ones we're listening to from Hurricane, I wrote starting around 1984 when I got here. But I had already started doing writing a bunch of tunes leading to coming to New York that had a lot of different rhythmic elements in them. Yeah.
Okay, so now we're triangulating towards rhythm as a risky business. No, rhythm as a serious and enduring interest for you, and I think listening through to all the music, I felt like in every piece there's some sort of rhythmic thing that's unusual that's going on right from the beginning of your composing. Yeah. And I have a piece I wrote in Colorado that I never performed in New York that had like some wacky metric modulation, and this was in sort of around 79 or 80 or something like that. Did you stumble into it intuitively, or was there something that triggered that? Well, that's funny. An exterior. I could point to particular music I listened to that influenced me a little bit, but I think somehow that was just, I don't want to just say an aptitude. It was sort of just this thing that drew me to it. And but definitely to give credit, I heard early concerts by the first Mahavishnu Orchestra, for example. Well, you can go back; they were doing some pretty interesting rhythmic things back then. Yeah. I heard not early in Mingus's career, but early in my career, I went and heard Charles Mingus live a couple times. Wow. They were doing Sue's Changes. So there were people who were doing interesting rhythmic things, maybe a little bit less doing standards in odd meters and that kind of thing. That seems to happen more now. But there were definitely, this stuff was in the air some, and I wasn't the only one who felt it in the air. I was writing this kind of stuff. I came to New York, got hired to play in Arrow Parker's Tentet, which had people like, Steve Coleman,
actually Graham Haynes, a lot of people like Robin Eubanks, people that were in and out of the band. But Steve and I were in the band for a while together. And then Steve ended up hiring me to play in his group, which I did for a few, I'd have to think exactly how long. I remember once I looked and I think it was 26 rehearsals, 2 recording sessions that never got released, and 1 paying gig. Of course, the paying gig was a festival in Austria, which was nice. But this was before Steve could get gigs, really. But he was doing interesting rhythmic stuff. I was doing interesting rhythmic stuff. And you know, it was clear it was a good match, you know, to have different people with these interests. So there were other people who were interested in this kind of thing at the same time, for sure.
Yeah.
And what happened that was interesting is when I got together a group in New York, and at the first rehearsal, I played some pieces that I had written in Colorado. And I had a wonderful group in Colorado, people who loved the music and would just get together and rehearse even when we didn't have gigs. And it was all about creative music and a cooperative. It was a wonderful band. But the first time the New York Cats read through the music at rehearsal, Keith Copeland, Armin Danielian, Calvin Hill, it was like, oh, okay. That's what I've been trying to get to for all this time.
You mean because they could play,
they totally understood
music out of it.
They totally understood it, and they brought their own thing, which is what I want people to bring. Yeah. And so it was particularly interesting with Keith, because I don't know how much you know Keith Copeland's whole background, but I mean, he played with the Heath Brothers, Johnny Griffin, Sam Jones's group, some more out there things like George Russell's, later orchestra thing, but also some things people don't know about, like he's played in Stevie Wonder's band for a while. But people thought about Keith as a really straight-ahead guy, and indeed he was amazing straight-ahead. But I would bring him these pieces with really unusual rhythmic elements, and man, he would kick on it, and it would just sound so organic. He would play it great, but it wouldn't sound like a high school chemistry project. You know, he would bring all the soul and spirit to it. So that really, then realizing I had that to work with, I was writing more pieces with these cats in mind.
Right. It's interesting because it's something you said on the phone the other day about these rhythmic ideas in the history of jazz and the development of what we think of as maybe odd rhythms or unusual rhythms, or certainly not, odd time signatures, right? But more devices that use different,
right? Rhythmic superimposition.
So what you said about Keith Copeland is, he's a supreme master of understanding how that fits in the history of the music, where the music comes from,
for sure. And so one of the things that's fun to me is in a case like that, getting someone who's great at this stuff, but they're not really known for it. And we had this group that was really doing it for some years, and Keith would get all of his friends, come to our gigs. So sometimes I'd be looking out in the audience. It was pretty daunting. I mean, it was like, some all-star audience, and all these people enjoying it a lot and into it, and hearing Keith in this different context.
Yeah, but you were playing your off. So that must have been, I mean, just from hearing this record, some serious playing going on. Was there anything in that tune in particular called Push Pull that you can describe of how it works? Here we are, how many years later? 32 years later.
Yeah. Well, I hope I'm not saying the wrong thing on your podcast. Off the top of my head, the melody is a 9/4 cross rhythm against 4/4 for the whole first section of the tune.
Oh, I knew it.
Yeah. So by the way, I know we'll wait a second to talk about the rhythm books, but volume 4,
we don't have to wait. You can talk about the rhythm book.
Yeah. So it's 6 volumes of this book that I just finished writing.
Yeah.
And volume 4, the entire volume is devoted to cross rhythms on 4/4. So I've never seen anything like this, and I felt it was such an important topic, and such an interesting area that I ended up devoting entire volume to it. So there was an example of me doing it.
That's really great. I only have the first volume, and it's called The Rhythm Book. And the first volume is beginning notation and sight reading. And the way that you break it down is so thorough. I've never seen it quite so piece by piece and step by step, and it's really well thought out.
Thanks.
And it's also how to put this? Well, I would say like it's uniquely suited to somebody who wants to improvise. Whereas, if you're working like from the Hindemith elementary training for musicians, which is also a dastardly tome and dangerous, and it's elementary training, and you get to the middle of the first chapter and you feel like, oh my God, I should just go back to kindergarten.
I sometimes mention that book to my students, and I say that he should have put elementary in quotes, and I wish he had lived to write the intermediate volume, because it pretty quickly gets challenging.
Right, imagine if he had an advanced volume.
He's got a lot of great things in that book, but have you ever met anyone who actually learned rhythmic notation and sight reading from that book?
I don't know.
Because
maybe.
Because it progresses in a way that someone who knows it can really appreciate. This is brilliant how he's organized it, but it feels to me like it. I might be wrong, but it kind of has a sense to me of someone who hasn't actually worked with students at taking them from one step to the other, because it progresses in certain things very quickly.
Or maybe there's a bias towards one tradition, towards the way that he learned it.
Could be. And the other thing is, of course, in fairness, he wasn't trying to talk about improvisation. He wasn't trying to talk about syncopation. There's a lot of stuff that wasn't swing. There's a lot of stuff that wasn't in there.
Right. And the view of rhythm is very Eurocentric and coming from where his music is coming from. Absolutely, I would say that. But I also think that there's some universal nuts and bolts in there. And I guess the only reason that I'm bringing up Hindemith is that I saw comparisons to your book, which I think is a really great.
That's great. Thanks.
Thing that you have people reading 2 rhythms at a time by the end of the first volume is kind of amazing. And if you're not a musician and you're listening to this and you're interested in this kind of stuff, I would say this is a great volume to pick up, because you really can wade in from page 1 and just, I see.
Yeah.
And it'll give you a lot of insights into how the music is, or how rhythm is organized.
And the insanity of my project was making it 6 volumes that go from this level to what you're going to see when you get volume 6. Because this volume, one of my target audience, I had a couple of target audiences, and one of them would be a class at a school where someone's teaching, basic rhythmic things to students, but another is a person, including some people I know, who have no musical background, might be someplace where there are no classes or teachers available, and I want a book where they can start on page 1, and by the end, they can follow it page by page. By the end, they're at a pretty nice level of understanding about how notation and sight reading goes. And volume 2, which will be out from the publisher very soon, goes from the intermediate level to, by the end, it's some pretty crazy, tricky rhythms that I think even a lot of my professional musician friends, if they just want to flex their reading and writing muscles, will find interesting.
Well, if you think of me as a professional musician, then you've already done it. But I use the term loosely.
And the other thing with these 2 volumes, which somebody like Hindemith didn't have this advantage, is that I created more than 1,000 MP3s of exercises and examples that the publisher's putting on their website. More than 1,000 for the first 2 volumes. Now, it doesn't mean that if you're a reader, you have to listen to 1,000 MP3s, but if there's a certain area you want to practice, there's plenty
demonstrations
of and every exercise in the book you can hear performed. So that kid in Indonesia or Chile or someplace who's learning all the stuff himself or herself can check the website, keep checking, say, okay, I'm getting that right.
It's all online.
Yeah,
there's no online CD that comes with the book or anything like that.
No, it's all online, and you have a code in the book, you can just access all the examples. But those are the first 2 volumes. But then, of course, by the later volumes, I'm getting to all the most advanced stuff that I teach in my rhythm classes at New School University, where I lead the rhythm curriculum, and then even things that I never have a chance to do. So I think I pretty much cover the spectrum from the most basic to pretty darn advanced.
How does someone find this book online? What's the best web resource?
The publisher is Hal Leonard,
Mm-hmm.
and they're I think I believe the largest music instruction book publisher in the world, which means that they have a whole mess of outlets that sell them, stores that sell them.
All right.
So if you go to halleonard.com, they have a place where in every city in the U.S., but also all these countries around the world, you can see all the venues that carry it. It doesn't mean that they're all going to have it in stock. You might have to order from them.
But that's where they should order it. You must have your own website too, where there's information about this.
Sure, but I'm not selling it directly.
You're not doing any mail order.
But Amazon has it, and Amazon keeps unnerving me by how inexpensively they're selling it. I don't even understand how they can do this,
because they're delivering it by drone, so they don't have the excessive postage.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so definitely, if you're listening and you're someplace where you can get Amazon, that's also a possibility.
Yeah, and also don't forget to go to iTunes and leave this podcast a rating and a review.
Yeah.
There, I asked. They said you're not going to get it if you... Anyway. So we should listen to another tune. So I was going to play something from the more recent record, which is 2004, So Rise Up. It's with Ari Honig, Matt Penman, and Mark Shim. It's a tune called Experiment Number 2. Do you want to describe the device beforehand, or should we listen first?
This one's got a lot, but this is inspired by some Carnatic, South Indian music practices. Mm-hmm. So there's kind of the A section has sort of a basic 7-beat cycle, and that's the third of three. I'm sorry, that's the second of a 3-bar sequence. The first bar knocks out one part of it, and the last bar knocks out a different part of it. Huh. So cumulatively, it's kind of like having a 19-beat cycle, and against that, it's a pretty rhythmically intricate melody that's cross rhythms over, things across the bar line over this 19-beat cycle. Then in the B section, it's like a kind of a augmentation of the cycle. And already this is much too technical. Just listen to it, enjoy it.
Well, I was just laughing because it's funny when I find myself at a concert starting to explain these kinds of details about a tune, and I'm just sort of stopping.
Right.
You know what?
Right. Do you have a little guy on your shoulder who's saying like, "Shut up, just play the music."
It's enough. All right, here it is. So that's experiment number 2. We were getting like a pretty in-depth technical explanation. before the music came on, and then I feel bad because I kind of cut you off.
No,
you were
I feel
going to tell
good.
us what was happening on the bridge.
I feel good that you cut me off. Let's leave it there.
No, but just what is the rhythmic thing that's happening on the second half of that? If you can.
Sure. So on the bridge, it's the same kind of Carnatic influence idea, but expanded. So now it's a 23 beat cycle, and that's probably enough to say. Although I will say, I'm delighted if anyone wants to email me. I'm happy to send them a score for free.
What's your email address?
Rory@RoryStuart.com.
Okay, got that?
Yeah.
No, not you. I know you've got that.
Yeah, no, I've got it.
I was speaking to our dear listeners.
Got that, dear listeners?
Merci. So, I guess what interests me in this is and I always come back to what are the challenges that I have encountered over the years. And so where does dreaming up the idea come from first? So in this case, you've got this Carnatic rhythmic thing that you're transmuting in different various ways, but then you've developed it and turned it into an overall tune and a form that these musicians can play on and are doing so really well. So what's the development process there for you?
Well, it's interesting because I teach a composition class. We'll talk about New School in a second if you want, but
sure.
I teach mostly I teach rhythm classes there, but I also teach a composition class, and we talk about how sometimes you have a full-blown piece that just pops up in your head, and all you got to do is, well, if you're old school like me, you got to write it down. Of course, I guess there are pop musicians today who will just sing it into their iPhone or something. But it's all
young
there.
Jazz musicians,
right. So it's all there, kind of at an instant. And there are other moments when you just have a little idea, and then you're pestering this idea. Of course, both of these have a long tradition. The first one has the tradition of Mozart, the stories I've heard, the whole symphony pops into his head and he's just writing out the transposed part as he's in a parlor. And the opposite extreme is the Beethoven, where there were more than 200 variations of da 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 before he came up with that. So in this case, the whole thing didn't just pop into my head at once. I was just playing around with this idea, and I kind of expanded till I had the model for what the rhythm section would do, and then the melody was much less calculated and cerebral. I just kind of was picturing the band on the bandstand and imagining what we would start playing, and it ended up being this melody that has a lot of cross rhythms and a lot of the kind of elements we're talking about, because I guess I just hear things that way a lot. But that was much more of an intuitive thing, just writing out the whole melody,
right.
And the melody happened almost instantly from beginning to end. I mean, I didn't even revise it much. It just happened.
And so it's a combination of techniques that go from pretty technical and gritty to intuitive and emotional and expressive.
Yeah. By the way, the first time I performed that was a typical, I guess if those of your listeners who are professional musicians around New York know this very well, but the New York thing typically for a lot of us is you get one rehearsal and then you get a gig.
Right.
And the first time I ever played this tune with this band, we had one rehearsal, and it was preposterous to bring in a piece this difficult, but it was amazing musicians. And then when I was going to play it, I think it was at Cornelia Street in Greenwich Village, and it was a packed house, but a lot of non-musicians. I'm thinking people aren't going to know what to make of this one, and I just dove in and we just played it, and it worked great. I mean, all the places where the train can get off the tracks, it didn't. So it all just gelled. But still, when it was over, I thought people were just going to be looking baffled. And that got the biggest applause I remember that night, because it was so striking. All the non-musicians were going crazy. And I think they could feel there was like just this kinetic, kind of the energy that was in the air.
Well, on that level of musicians too, then there's also the thing of them being so deeply absorbed in the process of just trying to get it, that there's a clarity that comes with that sometimes.
Yeah. So it was interesting.
This level of musicians,
right?
I'm sure they were ready to dig in and then do their own thing. But one of the things I was going to ask you, I had thought about in advance of this, was how often you confronted with musical colleagues who maybe can't do it or struggle with it or don't want to, or, because it is, you're asking a lot.
Sure. And it reminds me a lot. We'll talk about jazz education in a second, but there's a group of jazz educators that have an annual meeting. Mm-hmm. And I was there one time, and some of the older musicians at this little round table, their topic was, what's going on with this music today? All these kids are playing these tunes in 7/4, but they can't swing. Now, getting people to swing better, that's great. And there's a whole world around that. By the way, check out volume 3 for that.
Okay. How to swing.
Right. But the whole thing about playing odd meters, the thing that struck me is the older cats who were saying that were older musicians who could swing pretty well, but they couldn't comfortably play 7. So it bugged the hell out of them that these, 20-year-olds were playing their asses off on 7. So to me, one of the things about the series of books I wrote is I was also thinking about people like that who wanted to, might not be great at playing odd meters. And volume 5 is a whole book taking them from the very beginning about how to play odd meters. And if a lot of times old dogs don't want to learn new tricks, but if somebody wants to get good at odd meters, whether they're 15 or 70, I think you just have to be open to it. It's not right. It's not some vault that you can't open the door. You just need to know.
But it does bring up the fact of the development of rhythm in jazz and improvised music over the century.
For sure.
And how much the things that we do now, we lose things every generation, but we also gain things.
Yeah. You might not see it this way, but if I think back about what's happening today in music and what was happening, I don't want to just say 1968 and 1969, because there's a little bit of stuff in the mid-70s, but by the mid-70s, to me, almost all the harmonic things that I hear in most people's music today were already being played. Like major 7-sharp 5 chords, you didn't hear so much in the 60s. That was kind of an early 70s thing. Mm-hmm. So the whole language, harmonically, with a few outliers as exceptions, but mostly the language was there. So a great musician from
I'm going to let you say that and let that slide by. Register my disagreement.
No, I said you might not you might not agree with it, but I can think of a lot of musicians, great musicians.
I'm very uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can think of a lot of great musicians from that time. Herbie Hancock, Richard. I just think of pianists. Herbie Hancock, Richie Bark. All these people who could sit in on a gig. If you time traveled them from then immediately to today, they could sit in on a gig and be totally cool harmonically. But if you think about all these musicians in the late 60s and 70s, if they all time traveled and went to the clubs in New York from club to club, they would be stunned at how different the rhythmic language is from what they were doing then. So now I can moderate that thing a little bit. I understand that there's some stuff harmonically that's happened through these years, but
I also think that one of the big things that's different is just individuals have been encouraged to go find, on their own quests.
Sure.
And go off the deep end harmonically and rhythmically and melodically and also timbrally, tonally.
Right.
And so I think one of the things, and I don't want to belabor the point here, but I think one of the things that different is that in the 60s you might say that there was more common language. People played the same tunes. People played each other's tunes.
Right.
And now the real advances are made in the music. You go hear someone and they've dreamed up this new book of music that's theirs.
For sure.
That they're doing, that's moving the art forward.
Right.
And that's something that, you'll find parallels in the history to anything.
Yeah.
But you also hear people that are putting things together in a new and surprising and personal way.
For sure. But there were some people who are doing some personal, surprising new things back then too.
Absolutely.
But whether it's, if Warren Marsh suddenly time traveled and heard Mark Turner, or there are many, whether you're talking about timbre or if, I can think of Wayne Shorter in the mid-'60s playing on a standard was doing some pretty darn interesting harmonic twists and turns, that I still look at now and
Yeah,
look
no,
at
I disagree. No, of course not.
but the big thing to me, like I think actually your point is good. The idea that it's not such a common language thing, that people have gone in more different directions, that for sure that is a feature of today.
And they've been encouraged to do that. And also, I think part of it is that artists are also permitted, allowed. It still takes a lot of self-reflection and discipline and work, but they're allowed to have multiple visions, to examine their art from different perspectives and do things in different ways, and not have to just represent one monolithic statement.
Yeah, but I think the rhythmic changes is certainly at least one of the most striking things. If you just go from club to club, you're hearing people play odd meters, changing meters, metric modulation, rhythmic superimposition, cross rhythms, things that...
There's a lot of... I think a lot of this also comes from African music and Caribbean music and Panamanian, coming in and maybe at times as an overt influence, but at other times just as rhythmic devices and templates and new ways of understanding, thinking about the interlocking of syncopations and rhythms.
Mm-hmm. But I think now, because so much is happening rhythmically and there is so much rhythmic diversity, without even necessarily consciously thinking about it, people are seekers for rhythmically inspiring things. So you get some people that listen a lot to South Indian music and suddenly you hear these things. You get people that get deeply into Brazilian music, not just, Rio de Janeiro, not just samba and bossa nova, but they're really into maracatu and baião, all these different, and I mean, all kinds of things in Africa, a lot of different rhythmic cultures and different stylistic things from different parts of Africa, each of these things contributing. I had a student in my new school class from Peru, and when he's in my composition class, we had a different approach that we used every week for composition, but every time he managed to do very hip things incorporating Peruvian folk rhythm elements, even while he made things that fit the assignment. So people are looking at, all of these kind of rhythmic elements from each other, from places around the world, inventing new things. So it's so I guess we could segue to me telling you how I got into this topic of rhythmic teaching, but you might want to play more music.
No, I want to hear that, but I was thinking I would play The Shadows from this earlier 1986 date.
That'd be great.
With Keith Copeland and Anthony Cox and Armand Danielian. And then we'll come back and talk some more. So you've been teaching at the New School for 26 years. You started in 92.
It's true. Actually, I started subbing for Keith Copeland, the drummer you just heard on The Shadows.
Yeah.
I started subbing for him in 1989.
Wow.
And but then in 92, he moved to Germany, and the school asked me to take over, not only to take over those rhythm classes, but to design a whole rhythm curriculum. Mm-hmm. And that was 26 years ago. And it's a story some friends of mine have heard, but I have to just tell you, because listening to Keith on that track makes me think about this. There were lots of different interests I had, lots of things I was doing, lots of possible directions for me. But in 1989, the one thing that was absolutely clear to me is that I never wanted to teach music. And
I probably would have said that at one point too.
Yeah. I mean, I had this image of teaching music like all these bored people sitting in a classroom and you're babbling up. It just sounded awful to me. So at least I knew that in my life. I never wanted to teach music. And my dilemma was when Keith Copeland, who was really the most supportive band member you could imagine. I mean, he was amazing for me, as I mentioned, bringing all of these famous and not famous, all these colleagues of his to hear our gigs, connecting me with record companies, he was, and just like emotionally, a super supportive guy. And it always, he was 9 or 10 years older than me, already, a nearly legendary guy when I started playing with him. And I never felt like there was much I could give back to him. He never asked me for a favor. And then one day he said, Rory-san, he used to call me Rory-san, I got a favor to ask you. So I was like, anything for you, Keith. And it turns out, I think he was going to Japan with Hank Jones. And he said, listen, I'm teaching there's this rhythm class I'm teaching at this place called the New School. And, you write all these rhythmically unusual pieces. I think you'd be great for this, and I need someone to sub for me. So would you do it? So my heart sank. It's like, oh my God, teaching a class. But I thought, okay, it's only 1 or 2 classes. It's for Keith. So I said, sure. And the very first class I went to, sounds like comically, completely turned my head around about teaching, because there were these very talented, really eager, really interested group of students, and I would bring an idea to them, and they would ask these great questions, and we would start making up exercises. And by the end of the class, when I left the school, I was walking down the street, and there were all these ideas buzzing in my head, things from that kind of what we had talked about led to other things. And I was sort of thinking, wow, I want to get home and write, compose some new stuff. And then I looked at myself for a second. I thought, wow, this teaching isn't what I thought it was.
Yeah.
And apparently the students liked it a lot. And so then
I think if you're doing it right, you learn just as much as
sure.
the students do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so over the course of 89, 90, 91, whenever Keith went on the road, he would have me sub for him. And then to the credit of the New School, Martin Mueller, the director of the jazz program, who did it for 30 years, he only recently retired, the faculty was filled with legends. I remember the first faculty meeting I ever went to. We're in this little room, and I'm looking, and there's Billy Harper, and there's Jim Hall, and there's Junior Metz. I'm looking, there's
Reggie Workman was already there.
Yep, he was already
Yeah.
there. There's Charlie Purcell. I mean, it was like filled with legends. I thought I'm never going to, in my life, be with so many musical legends in one room and nobody's playing an instrument.
I think that Jane Ira Bloom has been there a long time and
actually
added a lot.
Not that long. Actually, she wasn't there back then.
Came a little later.
Yeah, she was a little bit later. But there was a whole generation of people that were Jimmy Cobb was teaching in one of the other rhythm classes. It was just filled with all these people who were like heroes to me. And Martin could have easily gotten some famous cat to more famous than I was. I was already getting on a few downbeat critics polls and stuff, but he could have gotten some super famous cat to teach rhythm classes. But for whatever reason, he gave it to me. I mean, I guess maybe I had proven myself over those few years. But it's been a blast. And the thing I said about rhythm developing so much through these years, I feel like I hit the jackpot, because if I were teaching an ear training class, I would love to. I've done that a bunch. I subbed. I love teaching ear training classes. Or a theory class. I've taught a theory class. I love teaching theory classes. But there's something about the last 26 years of teaching rhythm classes that it's constantly evolved, and there are constantly new examples. And, some of my early students would graduate and go on and become huge stars and do amazing recordings. And a bunch of years later, students are bringing me these recordings and say, listen to what this guy's doing. I want to transcribe it. I'm like sort of quietly thinking, like, wow, that's great. Robert Glasper or Aaron Goldberg or John Ellis or Marcus Strickland or E.J. Strickland or Becca Stevens. All these people, are doing all these great things, and all these new students are checking it out. So, So whereas a lot of teachers at least try to change the subject that they teach so they don't get stale, I feel like I never get stale teaching rhythm. It's endlessly interesting to me.
You have this tune called, is it Lembranças?
Lembranças.
Is that a Portuguese word?
It means memories, recollections, or souvenirs.
And does that come from time in Portugal, or was it just a...
I listened to Brazilian music. Actually, that was something my parents listened to. So I listened to Brazilian music since I was a kid. And this is inspired by a lot of Brazilian music I love, but I wrote a piece in 6/4 that's got a kind of a 4 in the time of 6 happening, and immediately when I brought it to Keith Copeland, he put a different wrinkle on it than I expected. And it's been interesting because this is a piece I've played sort of through my musical career, and the version you're going to hear is you'll hear what Ari Honig brought to it, which was pretty different than what Keith played.
I was one of the things I was interested to ask you, since the dates are so far apart, like what sorts of changes. But let's listen to it.
Sure.
Lembranzas. So again, that's Ari Honig and Matt Penman and Mark Shim. And you said that Ari did something different with that than Keith Copeland had done.
Yeah.
Anything in particular? I mean, it is very polyrhythmic, the way these approached it.
Yeah.
And it to me, at least, it feels clear that the 6 and the 4 are happening simultaneously.
And Keith
in
also,
that rub.
Yeah, Keith also made the 6 and the 4 very clear. You know, you were talking with me a little bit before about Steve Coleman, and he's an example of someone who's paid attention to these different traditions. Mm-hmm. But I remember the group that I was with, that I played with him with, you know, for the longest, with Cassandra Wilson and Jerry Allen, and Graham Haynes and Steve, and, you know, a bunch of excellent musicians. And we were doing things where often the tricky thing was the way the parts hooked up. Because you weren't playing the same, you know, you might be playing a part that was rhythmically very different than what someone else in the band was playing, even as it all worked over the same cycle. Now, you know, I was clearly influenced by the same kind of things I was listening to, influenced by African music, also clearly our generation, influenced by funk. I used to go and hear James Brown live in my neighborhood theater all the time. Mm-hmm. But you know, I was listening to Paul Got Ragout from way back, thanks to, indirectly, to Jack DeJohnette and Bob Moses, and more directly, thanks to Robin Gould. And so I would say those are examples of very different traditions. You know, I mean, somebody goes and hears a Dave Douglas quintet concert, and you've done something in a tune that they had never thought of doing, and then, you know, that creeps into their, and then that pushes them a little bit to some new stuff, and then who knows where that's going to lead. So, you know, whether it's a composition, a performance, or something you teach somebody in a class, you know, each of these things, I feel like they're little...
It's a way of giving back.
Yeah, they're little influences. It's like an ocean with all these waves. You know, we're not reshaping the ocean, but, you know, one wave spreads out to other waves, and, you know, so it's...
And that reminds me that I should mention for people who listen to Dave Douglas Quintet, there's a tune, what's it called?
That would be Variable Current?
Variable Current.
Ah, good.
It's a tune that I wrote,
yeah,
that I brought into the band, and it had all these metric modulations, and the idea was that it gradually speeds up and then gradually slows back down based on a series of metric modulations, and it's over a harmonic form, and there's a melodic structure. And we were out playing it, and several of my band members pointed out that the math of the metric modulations didn't add up, that in fact it was wrong. And I tried to deny it for the longest time. It's not only a river in Egypt. And then, so I finally took it to Rory, and I showed it to him, and he goes, yeah, no, this is wrong, but you could fix it. So we were right near where you live, there's a beautiful public park where there's a swimming hole in a river, and we were out there talking about it for like an hour and a half.
Oh yeah, I remember that well.
Finally, the tune got fixed, and I 2 years later brought it back to the band, and then we finally ended up recording it. I think it's on Brazen Heart. Uh-huh. And by
so
the way, thank Rory for that when you listen to it.
And while we're giving thanks to Dave Douglas for generously letting me use the score of that piece as an example in Volume 6, which has a whole big section on metric modulation.
An example of you saving me.
No. An example of great things you can do with metric modulation. I have a Jeff Tain Watts example. I have a Dave Douglas.
Great.
A bunch of interesting examples. So.
That's great. That's great. So everybody should check out this book. And we should wrap up this interview, but I just feel like it needs to be mentioned that this is not your first publication, that you have a prior book, which I find completely incomprehensible, and it's about virtual reality. And what year did you write that? I can't remember the name of it. What is it?
The Design of Virtual Environments.
Right.
And I think I was writing it in 1995.
Jeez.
And got published. I think it didn't actually get published until 1996. It's a little bit funny because, of course, this is like a hot topic now, 22 years later. And so...
Well, Drummond is reading it because he's scoring music for 3D virtual environments and video games. And so he's like going to the original text by Rory Stuart.
So it was one of my diverse sideline interests.
And also ahead of time, you have this title, I hope I'm saying it right,
Synecdoche.
Synecdoche
In Schenectady.
Because there was this movie just a few years ago called Synecdoche.
Or no, I think it was called Synecdoche, New York or something
Was
like
that what it was called?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Philip
I've heard
Seymour
of it. I
Hoffman.
never seen it, but all of a sudden I discovered a few people had heard of that word, which by the way,
a puppet theater director, and he gets a MacArthur Genius Grant, and he invents this whole parallel reality.
I've never seen it. I should check it out.
It's but I had never seen the word before then, and now I know it was in your title. It's on this record, So Rise Up. So I think we'll go out with a bit of Synecdoche in Schenectady with Ari Honig, Matt Penman, and Mark Shim.
Thanks.
Anything you want to say about this tune?
Well, I think I give that as an example in one of the books. I guess what I want to say about the books is that probably the typical person who's listening won't want all 6 volumes for their personal musical growth. You'll be at a certain place. If you're a beginner with notation and sight reading, the first 2 volumes are for you for now. Don't worry about the later ones. If you're a teacher and you're teaching people where you want them to learn how to read rhythms well, then those first 2 volumes would be great for them. If you're interested in concepts and performance practices, then volumes 3 through 6, which cover all sorts of rhythmic development and styles in 4/4, cross rhythms, odd meters and changing meters, metric modulation, rhythmic superimposition, etc. So it's a wide range of things. Don't feel you have to buy all 6 volumes there.
No, you should feel like it, but you may not get to it, but you should at least feel like you should have.
Well, that's right, and they would look beautiful all sitting next to each other on your bookshelf. Good point. Synecdoche and Schenectady, it's a kind of a wacky blues that has a missing beat in one bar.
That sounds great. Great. Thanks so much, Rory.
Thank you, Dave.
It's great talking to you.
My pleasure. Thanks.
All right.